Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you all for joining me tonight, and thank you to TIAT for hosting us. This is like the perfect intersection of all of the things that I find totally fascinating. Attention, slop, AI, brainrot. I love it so much that I did a PhD on it at Berkeley, and it is like every PhD's dream to have a room full of people that are interested in also talking about the topics that they research. So thank you for spending your Sunday evening with me. Before we get into talking about some of the research that I did at Berkeley and some of our findings, I want to start off and just watch two 30-second clips from two different movies. And I invite you to just take a moment, try to not look at your phone, and see how your attention feels while we watch these two clips. Was actually filmed here in San Francisco in 1968. Maybe you recognize some of those scenes. And now we're going to watch the same exact length of clip from Baby Driver, which is came out in 2017. So how did that feel? Did one maybe feel faster than the other? The newer movie felt a little bit faster. There were more cuts maybe. There was more visually going on. Maybe in the first, you wanted to pull your phone out of your pocket a little bit more. Maybe there was a bit more of a slower pace. I've obviously cherry-picked these two. One, because I love showing a San Francisco movie to start off. But also to make a point that the media we consume is really speeding up. And besides my cherry-picked example, you don't just have to take my word for it. The actual data on the average shot length in a Hollywood film goes in line with these two examples. So since 1930, the average shot length in a movie has sped up from about 12 seconds per shot, which is a pretty long time, right, before a cut, to 2.5 seconds per shot in 2015. So this is a pretty steep slope, which you can see here in Dr. James Cutting's paper. And this pattern isn't just in movies. I think it's a really salient example right now, especially if you've tried to watch an older movie lately. Maybe you've noticed it felt a little bit boring, even if it's one that you remember really liking, 15 years ago. The kind of proliferation of online and digital content has allowed a lot of the media that we consume to speed up, to compete for holding our attention as there's more to compete with, right? Phones and pockets, etc. And maybe one kind of extreme example of this is Brainrot style content, which can now refer to a lot of different things, but kind of originated as these sort of weird compilations of like soap cutting and like satisfying deck scrubbing with like a Reddit story time. And I was working with some undergrads at Berkeley at the time, and they were like, we love these, like this is our like way to chill out at night, it's awesome. I was like, okay, I have to know about this. I researched attention, what's going on here? So if you haven't been introduced to the world of Brainrot yet, I would love to share an example. So this is a video from YouTube Shorts that has just over 12 million views.
How do you politely tell guests that they overstayed their welcome? My grandpa had this hilarious way of handling a family that used to show up at our door during dinner. They lived a few houses down, and every evening, right when we'd sit down to eat, they'd come knocking. The excuse was always the same. The wife was too tired to cook, and they didn't want to trouble with making their own meal. At first, we were nice about it. Grandma would set out a few extra plates, and for about a week, it felt kind of neighborly. But the novelty wore off real quick. They started showing up every single night, never bringing anything, never offering to help with dishes, and always taking the biggest portions. Grandpa was not having it anymore. So one evening, after we finished eating, instead of washing the dishes after like usual, he just pushed his chair back, picked up the plates, and set them down on the floor. Our dogs rushed right in and went to town, licking every bit of food off them. When the dogs were done, he picked up the slobbery plates and calmly put them back in the cabinet like nothing happened. The family was stunned. Finally, one of them asked, do you do that every night? Without missing a beat, Grandpa said, oh, absolutely. Got to save water, you know. The look on their faces was priceless. They never came back for dinner again.
Okay, so if you already know and love Brainrot, maybe that was some useful like social advice that you can take with you. But this is what a lot of the students I was working with a couple years ago were really into, and so I kind of want to take you also on the journey that I went on tonight, where we can think about this from a psychology perspective, like what's going on with this media that we're consuming, why do we like it, why is it holding our attention, and like should we worry about it? So to start to answer this question, I want to kind of back up and think about some really foundational principles from psychology to help us answer these questions. To start off, probably everyone in this room already knows that attention is limited, right? That is just inherently what attention is. There's too much information in the world for you to consume, and so you have this really beautiful and elegant and effective attention system that helps you filter out all of the noise in the world. Like right now, you're maybe ignoring some other things to try and be here and pay attention to what I'm talking about. And it usually works pretty effortlessly. You know, maybe you've experienced a really boring class or lecture that you had to be a bit more effortful to pay attention to. But for the most part, we're able to navigate really busy scenes with no effort at all. And so there are two main things that kind of build up this really elegant system that helps us navigate a really busy world. The first set of factors that influence our attention is informational utility. So you can pay attention to something because you want to learn from it, like we're all doing right now, right? If it's something you're curious about, you want to know more, you can pay attention to something, and that will help you navigate the world. And we're really, really good at this. From about 6-month-old, infants are already paying attention to things that are going to be most useful for their learning, which is really cool. The second set of things is visually salient things. So this is also something that probably everyone here knows, right? Maybe there were fireworks that caught your attention last night, right? Bright and shiny things, flashing lights, bright colors, high contrast, motion, and these are also really helpful cues, right? So you can pay attention to something because you're learning, or maybe you need to detect a potential threat, right? If something is running by or there's a car coming down the street, those are also things that are going to pull your attention. And importantly, the way that we consume information is changing a lot and really rapidly, right? So the faster pace of movies that we started off with is kind of just one example of a larger trend across how we consume information on the whole, right? It's not just in your leisure time, maybe you're scrolling, but also the way that you're working or trying to learn if you're at school. And so this began with the adoption of writing, right? A really, really long time ago. But fast forward today, and you all have probably a phone in your pocket that has like the whole history of all the information in the universe on it, which is a lot of information to have access to at any given point. And so each of these iterations in how we consume information made information more accessible, right? It didn't just change the format and how it looks, but it gave us access to a lot more. And this is not something that I came up with. Herbert Simon captured the underlying sentiment of this and these changes in media in his theory of the attention economy. So in his lens, these new mediums don't just create an abundance or wealth of information, but rather they're creating a scarcity of attention, right? So if information consumes attention, right, your tweet or your YouTube video needs attention, and there's only so much to go around. And so it's created this really competitive media environment that we're all experiencing right now. And in this current environment, disengagement has become an obstacle to ad revenue and influence, right? If I scroll away from your TikTok or don't share it with my friends, that is gonna hurt you in the long run, right? So you need to make content that is gonna keep people's eyes on the screen for longer. That's the goal. And algorithms that are sorting and suggesting content are often relying on engagement metrics specifically to decide what to show to a user, And this is getting more and more complicated now. Probably a lot of folks in this room also know this. But digital content is using engagement metrics to guide our online experiences. And so if we're maximizing for eyes on screen, more engagement, it's kind of an important question to ask, like, what are we really maximizing for? Is engagement or looking at a screen really something that we want to make the pinnacle of this like online environment or online platform? I think one kind of area where this has become really talked about is kids and kids' use of media. You've probably all heard the term iPad kid or iPad baby. And so this is where I started kind of my journey of answering some of these questions about media. Is like, what's happening to kids? Like, are they okay? Like, is it a good idea to give them an iPad? And there wasn't really great data on it at the time. I won't be talking about it a ton tonight. We're going to talk more about adults. But we know that faster paced, visually salient content can be really harmful for kids in their ability to develop healthy attention regulation, and regulate their own emotions. So the fact that we see media on the whole speeding up kind of made me wonder, like, what's happening in the kids media space specifically? Is kids media also speeding up? Because we know that that could be a problem. And so I looked at it across different platforms to see if platform design and the incentives on a platform would shape the pacing of media on that given platform. So does a platform with more competition, like YouTube, compared to less competition like Netflix or PBS even, have different pacing of media? And so I'll show you just a couple examples. So we've got Bluey on the left here, which is a very popular kids cartoon. And then Vlad and Nikki, which is one of the most popular kids YouTubers out there right now. And so even without like being a scientist who thinks about this all the time, you can probably notice that the YouTube video has a lot more going on visually than Bluey. Sometimes when I start this slide, people are like, oh, the Bluey clip isn't playing and the other one is, just, we need to fix that. So it's a lot slower paced, right? So we have this really fast paced YouTube content compared to what we're seeing online. And I just kind of noticed this as I was working with kids at Berkeley and was like, there's gotta be a way to quantify it. And so I went down this tangent of learning how to use computer vision to quantify what's actually on screen and how much it's changing. And so we can do that with a measure called flicker. And that's what this looks like when we actually quantify it and graph across the video how much is changing frame to frame. So the x-axis on these plots is like your timestamp or your frame number in a video. And the y-axis is how much changed between each frame, right? So if you think about a video being a series of pictures that are put together really fast, how much changes between each one of those? And if all of that was a bit too much, the YouTube one is really high and the Bluey one is really low, and that's what we're quantifying. And so we looked at this across between 2 and 3 million frames for each content type, or 20 to 30 hours of content for each type, to see what the general trends were on different platforms. So again, we looked at free content on YouTube, paid streaming content, and then publicly funded content as sort of a control of like, okay, what is the best educational stuff that we have out there actually look like? And just like, first off, we replicated the result that media is speeding up, also with kids media. So we see that ad-supported content, YouTube in the blue, paid content in yellow, and PBS in red, all of these are speeding up. PBS looks pretty flat here because of the axis, but it is also speeding up. Sesame Street is getting faster as well. And so, okay, it seems like kids' content is speeding up, but what about between platforms? And so what we found is that YouTube or free content for kids online is much higher in terms of faster pace and more going on visually than paid or PBS content. And so this is really concerning because we know that lower income kids watch a lot more YouTube because it's available for free, and they spend more time on screens. So this is really concerning because if kids are watching more content that is more visually salient for a longer amount of time, they're at greater risk for not only disruptions to their learning, but also the long-term harms that can come with excessive exposure to this content, right? Like difficulty regulating attention and so on. And so we're seeing that this kind of content on YouTube is a lot faster paced. And we had this interesting kind of natural control in our experiment. We decided to select shows based just off of popularity and engagement metrics to see if we could measure what actually kids are watching and how it varies between platforms. And we ended up having content made by the same producer in 2 different categories, one paid and one for free. So maybe you've heard of CoComelon, it's like really popular with preschoolers right now. And they offer YouTube content as well as a paid Netflix product. And it's marketed as the same product. So we have the same characters, the same sort of themes and storylines, but different platforms here. And we found that their YouTube content is significantly higher in Flickr, so faster paced, more visually going on, than their Netflix content. And so again, we're seeing that it might be due to platform design, right? I don't know that this is like the most insidious, terrifying thing in the world, but at the very least what we're seeing is that a more competitive platform like YouTube is making more salient content more popular than it would be on a paid platform, right? And so these platform designs, these ecosystems that we're trying to navigate and exist in are shaping the types of content that we're viewing and creating, right? So what's rising to the top also differs between these platforms. And so that's all of the like kid stuff I'm gonna talk about tonight. If you're interested in this or like this, like please come talk to me after. This is my like favorite kind of space. But in the spirit of TIAT and the Epistemologies of Slop, I really want to talk about Brainrot tonight. So Brainrot, if you missed it, was the Oxford Word of the Year in 2024, and generally refers to the kind of rot or harmful effects that we might expect from addictive or fast-paced or low-quality media. And as I was doing all this research, I was kind of curious, okay, is brainrot really something that's happening? Like, do I have brainrot? Or is this just like the moral panic of technological advancement, kind of like rebranded for the 2020s, right? Like, you know, my grandparents were always worried about TV or the internet. Is this our version of that? And so to start to explore and answer that, I looked back in time at other notable critiques of technological advancement. One of the earliest ones came from Socrates, who claimed that the invention of writing would reduce our capacity for critical thinking. And maybe this sounds familiar if you're in the tech space in San Francisco and have thought about using AI for anything. The critiques that we have are still echoing a very kind of similar sort of concern. And ironically, we only know this because his student Plato wrote it down, so you know, you get a take there. But I kind of spent my PhD then investigating what happens when we consume a lot of this media, and does it really change things? And so science begins with observation, if you remember the scientific method from like 1st or 2nd grade, right? Observe something and then let's try and explain it. While I was teaching an undergraduate class at Berkeley, I think it was 2 years ago at this point, I observed that some of my students were using a PDF to Brainrot app to study for their classes. And I was really like surprised and curious about this. So of course I then had to like, you know, pivot my whole PhD to do this. And so PDF to Brainrot study tools became pretty popular, and I was curious if this was just like a couple students that were kind of being funny and maybe trying it out, but it actually seems reasonably popular. So the most common or most used one is Coconote AI, which was just acquired by Quizlet, actually late last year, which is a platform that has over 60 million users. So there seems to be a reasonable amount of interest in this. And I was actually giving a lecture 2 weeks ago, and I had a couple people in the audience say that their friends were using it at college. So it seems to be popular, which is really counterintuitive, right? The idea of brainrot would seem inherently detrimental to learning or not conducive to studying. But its popularity maybe suggests otherwise. So if you are not using PDF to Brainrot, let me introduce you to it. Here is Dr. James Cutting's wonderful paper on the changes in Hollywood films over the last 75 years. I uploaded it to PDF to Brainrot so you guys can get a quick recap for our test that's coming out.
POV. You're a film buff who doesn't know why movies hit different now. So like Hollywood movies are getting quicker, faster, and darker. Skibidi toilet vibes, right? In the last 75 years, shot lengths are shorter. More action, more movement, and it's getting darker, FR. Filmmakers are basically trying to control your eyeballs, no cap. They want you locked in. This is like the evolution of film, making you pay attention more.
Okay, hopefully that was like a helpful recap if I was too boring the first time I said that. But so this is like genuinely what these apps do and how they work. It translates it nicely for Gen Z and Gen Alpha among us. And so this study that I did based on this actually resulted in a paper titled The Brainrot Effect, the case for adaptive attentional bandwidth. And this will be coming out in the proceedings of the Cognitive Science Society in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. And I did this work with my supervisor at Berkeley, Celeste Kidd, a PhD student at the University of Oregon, Maria Castaneda-Barba, and Professor Evan Orticio at Colorado College. And so we designed a within subjects eye tracking task to test whether PDF to Brainrot was effective. And so that means that participants got a chance to complete both our control condition and our Brainrot conditions. They got to do both. And they did this while they were watching it on an eye tracker so that we could see where their eyeballs were on the screen while they were learning. And so our conditions looked a little bit like this, and I'm going to give you an immersive experience tonight where you can get a little taste of what it would be like to be a participant in our study. So we start off with a little bit of our control condition, and then you'll see some of the test questions that go along with it, and then we'll try the Brainrot condition and see what that's like.
The paradox of windmills is this: extract kinetic energy from the wind while still letting the wind pass. Unlike a dam where you extract the potential energy from the height of the water, and so you can lower the water as much as you want without slowing the flow, with a windmill you extract kinetic energy from the motion of the wind, which causes the wind to slow down. So how much wind should a windmill mill?
Okay, so I think it's pretty engaging and fun to watch. Here's one of our test questions. What type of energy do windmills extract from the wind? Potential, chemical, thermal, or kinetic? Hopefully you're all thinking kinetic, that's our answer. And then we also ask participants to tell us how sure they are about that answer. So there's a slider here that says not sure at all to totally certain. So we ask them to go ahead and give us a sense of how sure you are that you're right. All right, now I'm going to show you the Brainrot condition, and so the video is going to pick up where it left off, and then we'll try another question.
So how much wind should a windmill mill? Well, the maximum possible amount of energy you can extract from the wind is simply the difference between its initial and final kinetic energy. Kinetic energy depends on the speed squared, so if the outgoing wind speed is, say, half the incoming speed, then the final wind energy will be a quarter of the initial energy, meaning that 3/4 of the energy was extracted when the wind passed the windmill.
Okay, so maybe you're a Brainrot learner and that was easier. Maybe that felt a little harder and distracting. Here's one of our test questions. What does kinetic energy depend on? Momentum squared, speed squared, square root of momentum, or square root of speed? And hopefully you're all thinking speed squared. And let's say you're feeling a little bit less certain about that one, maybe a little unsure. And so participants did each of these conditions, answered a 30-question multiple choice test for each, and then took a survey on their media habits and preferences. So we got a lot of data from these very generous college students. And what you're looking at here is a participant watching the Brainrot condition. And so this is a real participant's data that you're looking at their gaze with the pink dot that's moving around on screen. And so while they watched these videos, we measured 3 important things about their gaze data. One is just where they were looking on screen. So were you looking at the Brainrot? Were you looking at the actual content? And that's what you're seeing with the pink dot. The second is that we measured their pupil size. And so pupil size can tell us how much effort someone is putting in to stay on task or maintain attention on the video. And then finally, we measured their blinking. And so blinking regulates our visual input, right? If you close your eyes, the visual input stops. And so more blinking can indicate overstimulation, which is something that we thought might be relevant in our Brainrot study. And I mentioned that we asked them about their media habits and media preferences. And so we created a Brainrot preference score. And so this was a score that reflected a stronger preference for Brainrot content specifically. So really liking this kind of Subway Surfer style, 2 things presented at once content. We also created a more general media habit score. And so a higher media habit score was indicative of more screen time in general, right? Higher screen time, but also more consumption of maybe 2 streams of media at once, laptop and phone or laptop and TV, or sped up content, so watching lectures at 2x speed, things like that. And not surprisingly, these things were correlated, so people who like brain rot more also consume more media overall and more stimulating media in general. So what about the test questions? How did they do? We found that brain rot prefers learned better from brain rot. So what we're looking at here is their test scores on the y-axis, so the higher up, the more they're learning. And then on the x-axis across, the further right, the more they like brain rot. So our brain rot prefers are learning better in the brain rot condition shown in pink here. But they're learning worse in our control condition, so from traditional content. And so this negative blue slope is showing you that as someone likes brain rot more and more, the less they learn in that control condition. So they're doing worse on the test after watching the video, which is the gray background. And we saw the same sort of pattern in people's ability to judge their own learning. So remember that slider where we asked how sure you were about each question? We used that to basically calculate if we were to ask you to bet on whether you were right or wrong, would you be placing perfect bets and always getting it right? Or would you basically be flipping a coin to tell me whether you got that question right or wrong? And what we're seeing here is that folks who really like brain rot, so over on the right side towards the number 5, their control metacognition or ability to judge their own thinking was at complete chance. So they're at 50% chance for telling me whether they got the question right or wrong when they learned that from traditional media compared to brain rot. And this is really important, right? Because if you can't tell what you've learned and what you've missed, it's really hard to go back and fill in those gaps, right? So if you think about if you're studying for a test, it's really important to know which things you should spend more time on and less time on. Or if you've just started a new job and someone asks you, okay, cool, did you get that? Do we need to go over that again? And you don't know, that's gonna be really tricky to navigate the world in that way. So to understand why we were seeing these differences based on preference and media habits, we looked at the eye tracking data. And so what you're seeing here is the average blink response in each condition for people who don't like brain rot. So they have a score of 0 for their brain rot preference, and they're blinking more in the brain rot condition than they are in the control condition. And so that makes sense, right? If blinking is regulating your visual input, you might be overstimulated by brain rot if you don't like it, if you don't watch it very much. It's gonna be kind of like, whoa, too much, turn it off. And that's exactly what we expect, and that's what we see here. But we see the opposite for people who really, really like brain rot. So for the people with the strongest brain rot preferences, they blink less in the brain rot condition, suggesting that they are not experiencing any kind of overstimulation while watching brain rot. And this is what that trend looks like for our full sample. So you can see it kind of is this slope that goes up and down, right? It kind of changes across. So what's cool is that this variation exists despite participants watching like the exact same thing, right? They're all watching the same 2 videos, but they're having really different experiences as to whether it feels overstimulating or not, right? Is it too much on the screen, or is it just okay, it's fine, it's not a big deal to have the subway surfers there. Next, we looked at something that we call executive or cognitive load. So like, how hard is it to stay on task? How hard is it to pay attention? And again, we'll start off just looking at the people who really don't like brain rot with this score of 0 here. And what you're looking at is their pupil dilations. Their pupils are bigger in the brain rot condition than in the control, which suggests that they are like having a harder time paying attention in the brain rot condition. And again, that's probably not surprising, right? It's distracting. There's a lot on the screen. Already the little physics video was a lot. And then we added subway surfers, now that's a lot to try and maintain and stay on task. So they were experiencing more cognitive load while watching brain rot, which I think made a lot of sense. But we see the opposite for people who like brain rot. So by contrast, the people who learn better from brain rot, they are putting in more effort to pay attention to our control condition. So it seems like they are understimulated by our control. In simple terms, they just think it's boring. And so they're having a harder time staying on task and learning about the windmills and how they work. And so basically, we have really beautiful evidence that people who like Brainrot think that my study was boring, which was wonderful. And so this is what that looks like for the full trend. And so this suggests that more effort is required for Brainrot learners to attend to content without Brainrot, basically because, again, it's boring. And this is, I think, very surprising because I thought that I had already set the bar pretty high with those fun physics videos. But it turns out some students at Berkeley still find those a bit boring. And so together, these findings highlight two key attentional signatures that are associated with better learning from Brainrot. And it's very exciting because these signatures are not a function of where someone is looking on the screen, right? So remember that little pink dot that was moving around? It's not about where you're looking or how many times you switch between Brainrot and content. It's about your experience of, is this stimulating enough to hold my attention and to keep me on screen? And so our performance patterns are covariant with difference in effort, right, where cognitive load and perceptual load are overstimulation. And so in this paper, we're proposing an adaptive account of attentional bandwidth in which processing for an individual is shaped by their media consumption, and learning is probably best in an individual's optimal range. And so the way that I like to think about this is if you were to work out a muscle and the muscle got stronger, you would still be able to lift a really light weight, but also you'd gradually be able to lift heavier and heavier weights, right? What we're seeing here is more like turning up a dial, and that the more that you're able to consume that really highly stimulating or brain-rot content, it comes at a cost of the lower end traditional content. So it's not that the range is expanding, it's that this range is being shifted up, right? So we're seeing that it comes at a cost of the slower media, which may even not be that slow to some people, right? So, okay, so what should we do? Do we have brain rot? Is this a problem? How do we think about this? Public discourse is increasingly emphasizing resetting your attention span. There's trends where you should engage with more, understimulating content like reading an actual book. Or there's a TikTok trend that's probably a little old now where people were just trying to sit there and do nothing for as long as they could, timing themselves. And while these are kind of cool, funny trends, our study would suggest that these are actually effective, right? So if you can shift your attention span up to be a brain rot learner at Berkeley, you could probably also shift it down by engaging with less stimulating content, right? Maybe you've heard about neuroplasticity. That's been kind of a buzzword over the last 10 years, right? Our brains are plastic. You can adapt and do new things, and it seems like our attention spans might also be that way. Beyond individual practices, this discourse is part of a broader attention activism movement where disengagement with content is kind of a form of resistance to algorithmically curated feeds and resistance to corporate profit off of attention, which I think is really important right now, right? Being able to take back some of that control over what we're consuming online. And this adaptive account would suggest that these movements and practices are actually effective as well. Okay, so before we get into a conversation, I want to kind of leave with 3 takeaways. The first is that media consumption is shaping not just what you learn, but how you learn. So brain rot learners don't just learn less from traditional media, they actually lose the ability to track what they're understanding and what they're not understanding. So this sense of oh, I get it versus, oh, I kind of didn't get that, is being separated from their actual reality of what they're learning, which is really hard when you're trying to go back and fill in a gap. The second is that this is happening on platforms that are built to entertain you, not built to inform you. So the platforms that are really designed to capture attention are often the ones with the least quality control over their content, right? So maybe TikTok comes to mind. And people are adapting their learning process, in this case it was UC Berkeley undergrads, and also their sense of what they understand, to environments that are shaped by choice architectures like an infinite scroll or intermittent reward systems, and algorithmic curation that is designed to maximize engagement, not necessarily accuracy or information quality. And third, attentional autonomy is necessary to support an educated digital citizenry. So again, thinking about what we might be adapting our attention spans to. Are we adapting to entertainment systems? Does that then make it harder to maybe say read the New York Times or let alone a black and white PDF without PDF to Brainrot? And so current research, outside of my own research, there's great groups that I can always point folks to in the Q&A, researching kind of the erosion of democracy on a global scale and how social media might be part of that. And they suggest that part of that erosion of democracy that we're seeing right now is people's lack of control over their own attention and information consumption. And so this research on the societal impacts of social media tells us that this really matters beyond the individual level. We really need to support people to be in command of their own attention. So maybe it's not the end of the world to be a Brainrot learner, but maybe it's important to know so that you can make some choices about your media habits and your information diet. And so attentional autonomy, I think, is super crucial for learning and forming your own opinions. And there's growing evidence that taking away that autonomy of your attention is probably straining democracies across the globe, right? As people are not able to form their own opinions or consume the information they want. And if I can get on my soapbox for the last 30 seconds, I think culture and art is a lot more interesting when people form their own opinions, right? If we all agreed on the same thing in this room, it'd be kind of boring. And so I think the best art, the best ideas, potentially stronger democracies really depend on people being in command of their own attention to be able to support an educated digital citizenry and really interesting conversations. So resetting your attention, maybe reading a book in Dolores Park next week might start as self-care and feel indulgent, but I would propose that it's also really important civic work. And so next time you are chilling out doing nothing, I will be thanking you for doing your civic duty. So thank you for your attention. Yeah, so I think we'll do some Q&A now. I would love to answer some questions or hear your guys' thoughts.
Thank you, this is really awesome. I had a question. In the study, you basically created a measurement for people's media consumption habits, which is something that they can make choices over.
Yes.
I was kind of curious about how conditions or diagnoses like ADHD might play into this, especially thinking about kids in my life and like some of the kids stuff you studied, about whether it might be more appropriate for ADHD kids to learn via kind of Brainrot style content that is very fast paced, as opposed to figuring out ways to shoehorn them into more traditional, slower paced content.
Yes, okay, thank you for asking this question. So, the question often comes up, right? Is it something that we're seeing this like variation in the world that we're capturing, or are these people really changing their attention spans? And what about ADHD, where we know there's this attentional profile that doesn't fit so well with a lot of the systems that we have without support. So kids, especially with ADHD, need support to learn in a lot of traditional contexts because it's just not built for their profile attentionally. And what we're seeing is that we can't, first of all, measure ADHD in our samples specifically, but we do know that people kind of come into the world with a different level of stimulation need, and that can vary quite a lot. It tends to vary in a reasonably small range, we think, and that's why ADHD, for example, does stick out, and we really notice that, okay, this individual might need a bit more support, or this traditional classroom without windows or breaks isn't going to work well for this kid, right? They need a little more. And so it seems like probably more stimulation might get people to engage with more stimulating media, right? Maybe you have an ADHD sort of attentional profile, or just you're one of those people that needs a bit more stuff to help you pay attention. We think that it might be a feedback loop, right? So if you come into the world needing more stimulation, maybe you seek out TikTok and Brainrot, right? And then you like it more, which then pulls you further and further away from being able to pay attention to the slower paced stuff. and gets you into this kind of brain rot learner, as we're calling it, sort of zone. And probably individuals aren't necessarily coming to the world with that level of a stimulation need. It's really this feedback loop of like, okay, I really like it, and now it's familiar, and I'm good at learning from it, so I'm gonna keep doing it. And I really do not think, the term brain rot, it's catchy, it sounds negative. I don't necessarily think it's a negative thing. I think it is misaligned with a lot of the way that the world is set up, which is something that a lot of individuals with ADHD are experiencing already, right? Is that the world isn't set up for them. And now we're seeing that folks might be kind of pulling their attention spans in that direction as well, which then, if you are a 19-year-old trying to learn about the political landscape of your country, it might be harder for you to access high-quality information, let's say on TikTok or YouTube Shorts, compared to the New York Times or other more traditional print media. So I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to get pulled in one direction or the other, but the kind of differences or the inequality and lack of support for people with that attentional profile, I think, is something worth highlighting.
This isn't so much a question, but a kind of comments to expand on a historical point mentioned of Socrates being critical of writing as something that is active mind. There's actually a way more that you can find about this, where there was actually I think this was originally actually observed in Egypt, if I remember correctly. There was I think the term that they had for it was the curse of thought, where thought was the god of writing, and this was this bad side effect of writing. But there also was a very large amount of debate at the time, in ancient Greece, around how can you get deep knowledge, how can you get correct knowledge or wisdom, or how do you reach the deepest knowledge? And there was a very large amount of debate at the time about whether or not true knowledge and wisdom could even be expressed or communicated at all. And so, one thing I've been reading a little bit lately is Diogenes Laertius's Lives and Opinions of the Eminent Philosophers, which is this, I think, 2nd or 3rd century AD, big collection of biographies on a bunch of different philosophers. And in the first chapter or so, he lays out a couple different categories of for how to, different ways of categorizing these different philosophers he's going to talk about. And one that he mentions very explicitly is there are philosophers who wrote their works down, and there are philosophers who explicitly did not. And that was actually a very significant thing to take into account when thinking about these things like this. So, I think, to kind of tie this to today, I this is, when people bring this up, it's, oftentimes like, oh, here was one guy who decided not to write anything down, but actually, no, it was actually like a much more substantial debate at the time that lasted for centuries. And there were many people who were actually fighting against writing in a way. So
Yeah.
there's people can kind of take some ideas from that for historical context for current context.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. One of my favorite, psychology PhD, party facts that I do love to share in the same vein is that there's this really great study done on people's memory and how it's changed with the ability to Google things, right? So, if you test folks on how likely they are to remember a fact, they are more likely to remember things that are not Googleable, right? So if I tell you, Katie really, really likes this one chocolate cake at this one bakery in San Francisco, you're like, okay, gotta remember that because I can't look it up later. If I'm like, J-Lo's birthday is this date, you're like, cool, it's gone, right? And so it is like the mediums that we engage with and the way that we capture information does totally change how we engage with it and think.
You mentioned the fact that to learn better in a brain rot scenario, tend to do worse in a more classical school. Is there any research of how they're able to apply the knowledge? Is it that people who learn better through Brainrot are better at certain tasks when it comes to applying the knowledge and doing kind of long horizon work? Is it that they make better lateral thinkers, or is there any research on how they apply the knowledge?
Yeah, not yet. This is a wide open field, so if you want to get into Brainrot research, I do really encourage you. Please join me. Yeah, we're really looking at pretty broad learning right now, and we used the kind of study context as an example because it was a bit naturalistic, but there is definitely a lot of interest and curiosity, I think, about different types of learners. I think one question that I still have from this study is what about the difference between audio-only learning and this visual learning, right? Because it seems like this is just something to like hold your eyes while you listen about how windmills work, rather than that the subway surfers is really like helping you in any meaningful way. And so there might be something really interesting there about, right, like what about people who process audio better and learn better from audio but just need something to hold their eyes, because that's kind of the way that our world is set up. So someone should do that study.
Any more questions?
Hi, Sarah. I was wondering, have you noticed any correlation between brain rot or stimulation or lowered attention span and retention to memory / dementia?
Yeah, that is a big question right now. There's not great longitudinal work on the link between attention specifically and aging or dementia or long-term memory impacts. What we do know is that it seems like use it or lose it is sort of true, right? So continuing to use your brain, think critically, and practice kind of engaging in critical thinking seems really important in terms of healthy aging and maintaining memory. Even sort of with the like silly example, but the Googleable fact stuff, right? Your everyday practices of what you're using your brain for are really important for what your brain decides to offload. Your brain is kind of like a computer, and it makes really good, efficient decisions of what to offload. Okay, it seems like we don't need J-Lo's birthday, but you know, maybe we do need this other stuff. And so again, thinking about as you create your own media habits and your media diet, thinking about what habits you want to be building and what core competencies you want to maintain. It seems like you have a lot of power over.
Hi, I had an additional question piggybacking off of that. Is there any study in the past, or have you heard anything about just like the continual consumption of like, because this is something that holds a lot of focus and something that I'm getting out of your research, and so like the continual consumption and almost like addiction to that, like also contributing to longer term impacts or learning habits.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I've taken this narrow slice of attention to talk about tonight, but obviously there's a lot more going on, right? These intermittent reward systems or infinite scroll, right? There's a lot of what we call choice architecture built into these apps that we're using, right? So similarly to what do they put at the like grocery store checkout stand? Is it like really healthy food, or is it, you know, chips and gum and snacks? Those kinds of architectures that we're surrounded with really inform the choices that we make. And in our online environments, we are not really set up to achieve balance, right? They want engagement, you know, TikTok is really good at keeping you on, most platforms similarly are. And so, you know, I think it's kind of stacked against us, and that it's really hard to achieve balance, as much as everyone says like, oh, keep a balanced media diet, you know, read a book and watch TikTok, it's fine. But also there seems to be a component of whether you are an active participant in the online communities that you engage with. So online communities are sometimes really beneficial and important for people, right? So especially youth, maybe in LGBTQ plus communities or other communities, they don't have access to peer groups that would necessarily be similar to them. They get a lot of positive engagement from online communities. And so this is a really like positive, great side of social media that maybe we don't talk about very much because a lot of it is doom and gloom. The catch there is that you need to be an active participant. So I say this as a lurker, but like the lurkers are not getting the positive benefits of social media in the same way that folks are who really engage actively. So there seems to be a real difference between just consumption and actual participation in these online spaces as well.
Hi Sarah, I may have missed this, but I was just wondering how big the sample size was for the Berkeley students, and then also just how did you go about finding them? Was it like a physical paper, an email newsletter?
Yeah, so we collected data with just over 80 students. Our final sample is 75 students. Thanks to a lot of construction that happened last summer, we had to remove some. And at Berkeley, the undergrads get credit for participating in studies, so there is a really great built-in system for our data collection there.
Yeah, I was just wondering about how malleable one's attention span is. Like if somebody feels like they can only learn from highly stimulating brain rot content, like how long they want to be able to learn without it. Like how long would it take to basically sort of deprogram that or recalibrate towards lower stimulation?
Yeah, that's such a good question. We don't have great empirical research on this yet. I'm hoping we will soon. It seems like from just kind of personal accounts, people are experiencing within a couple of extended days, maybe a week or so, feeling an actual difference in their own attention spans, but we don't have a great large-scale longitudinal study on it yet. Hopefully soon.
I was just going to chime in. I think the age-old thing is that kids these days just have no attention span. So I'm wondering if there's any research looking at generational differences of, is an elder millennial looking at content differently than Gen Alpha, or how is that varying over time?
Yes. It's hard to know. We try to use the media habit stuff to tease apart age differences, because it's also hard to know people's brains change over time, right? But is it also a product of the environment that they grew up in with their media exposure? We ran an online version of this study with all ages of adults. There were about, I think, 250 adults. Our oldest participants were in their late 70s, and they were like, what is this? Is this not okay? So I think it seems like there are some pretty strong generational differences, and we did see a strong age effect of that older individuals did much worse with brain rot, which I would, infer probably is because of lack of familiarity with it rather than a difference in cognitive ability. But yeah, hard to tease apart.
Thank you.
Have there been any studies about the brain chemistry of brain rot?
Yes, that's a great question. Not yet about brain rot specifically. Dopamine is kind of the buzzword in this space. It does seem like there's some kind of training of the reward system, right? And so part of that is, again, these choice architectures of it's a bit like gambling, scrolling through your feed of ooh, maybe the next one will be really good, and it keeps you going. But it also does seem like with this familiarity and satisfying sort of visuals, there's also some sort of reward to that. But yeah, this paper that we're publishing in the next couple of weeks is the first empirical study on brain rot so far.
Hi, thank you for this work. This is awesome. I can't wait to read the full paper. How many pages is it?
We were limited to 6, sadly.
During some of the slides with the lovely charts, there was the x-axis for brain rot preference. Could you quantify more on what does that mean and how did that affect things?
Yeah, so our brain rot preference here is scaled just to be around 0. But we asked individuals specifically about whether they liked this type of brain rot content that they saw in our study or traditional media. So it was a 5 binary questions on, do you want to learn in this style? Do you find it entertaining? Is it more engaging? So those kind of forced choice questions of do you want to learn from brain rot or control? Do you want to learn, or do you find brain rot or control more engaging? Do you find brain rot or control more entertaining? Things like that.
And the average is this score.
Yeah, so we summed those for everyone because they were really correlated. So we summed it for an individual just to simplify the stats. And then here it is scaled. In these, I present the 0 to 5, right? So you could have a max score of 5 if you said brain rot for all the different categories that we asked about, or 0 if you said control for all the categories we asked about.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey Sarah, thanks so much for the fascinating study. I think my question is kind of related to that. When I was watching the 2 videos, I actually find that the brain rot one easier to focus, but that I actually don't prefer consuming these Brainrot videos, and that reminds me of I actually prefer noisy libraries to study in than the quiet library. So I wonder if there's another x-axis we could measure than just like the preference of consumption. Maybe there's something else there.
Yeah, totally, yeah. Some people really like to study, you know, with total silence. Some people find that distracting and are like, okay, I can listen to music, but it can't have lyrics because that's too distracting, but I need a little bit of background, right? We all have this kind of intuitive sense of what is going to be a good level of stimulation for our own learning, and we tend to be really good at finding it, right? Like, you know that you want to go into a library with a certain amount of noise, and that's going to help you. And so we don't have great, our probably best measure is this sort of Brainrot preference in terms of the visual content, but we don't have a great measure of like how much stimulation someone needs beyond self-report, which is like useful, but also kind of under-satisfying in some ways, because we would really want to know like why do you need a different level of stimulation and what sort of stimulation is going to meet that versus not, because it's going to look different for different people. Yeah, good question.
I was surprised that people who preferred the Brainrot content actually learn better from Brainrot content. My question is, do you think that perhaps if it was coupled with the quality content and some techniques like spaced repetition and so on, in the future, because it would be easier, like it would be more appealing to people for them to for there to be more people who are actually living from Brainrot rather than just the old ways.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems so. Like, we have evidence that would say yes, right? That adding Brainrot is going to help learning for some individuals, and that the individuals it would help know that and could, like, opt in, right? I was talking to a friend the other day, and of course they know me as, like, the Brainrot friend, and they said that when they shared their screen at work, one of the engineers they were working with had Subway Surfers playing in the corner. Like, so it seems like people are opting into this, and it seems to be effective for the ones that want it. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you for sharing the study. I wanted to ask about whether there's any conclusive results on the absolute effect on Brainrot and the results that people had in the test. Because it seems like that slide was showing mostly in relation to Brainrot or traditional content. Is there any conclusive evidence to see?
Like longitudinally, so can you become better and better at Brainrot sort of thing versus the trade-off? I would love to do this. If someone wants to give me a giant grant, I will do this study. Yeah, we don't have great evidence on how flexible this is and on what time scale it can happen. The tricky thing about doing research with undergrads is that they are readily available, they have to do it for credit, they're pretty good participants, but they also are mostly Gen Z and Gen Alpha and like grew up, like some of them are iPad babies now, right? We're kind of on this cusp, and so it's really hard to know how much of this is something that is because of what they've grown up with, or if this is something that they've discovered at Berkeley because they're like taking CS and very stressed and they think Brainrot is the sudden answer. We really need like longitudinal work in this space.
Hi, nice, Sarah. This was a fantastic presentation, by the way. Thank you. You mentioned earlier about this attention-grabbing architecture, right? And of course, with any architecture, there are people designing that architecture, there are institutions designing that architecture, right? They're the producers of it, and they're the consumers of it, right? So I was curious about the pushback, the resistance kind of aspect to this that you mentioned earlier, right? Do you notice that the resistance, the pushback is coming more from the producer side of that or from the consumer side of that? I'm just thinking of an example on Instagram. You know, there's I don't know if people have seen this before, but those reels where the reel starts with like something attention grabbing and then suddenly stops and says, "Hey, I got your attention here. You should go outside and touch grass," right? Something like that, right? So I'm curious to know where you see that pushback coming from.
Yeah, I think, maybe those are in earnest of like they really do want you to get off their app and touch grass. It would seem a little counterintuitive in terms of a business model to really get people to close your app and go touch grass. I see a lot of the resistance coming kind of at the individual level, especially with, the people want more control over their algorithm, right? And like, there's been this kind of resurgence of young people now like really natively understand what an algorithm is and why they see what content they do. And it's kind of this thing that they talk about, they're like, oh, my algorithm is like so good, or I have this like really cool niche algorithm, right? It's like their friend almost. And so, there's resistance to this sort of like being controlled by big tech. And they really enjoy feeling like they have autonomy over that. So I think it's resistance to this sort of like slop, sifting through stuff that's meaningless and hard to find your way around, and wanting to have more control, not just like, oh, I'm gonna set a 30-minute limit, and when it goes off, I'm actually gonna get off, because I don't think that really seems to be working for that many people. The bricks seem to be increasingly popular and effective. There's an app called OneSec that some of my collaborators in Berlin developed, where you have to like do a breathing exercise before you can actually open TikTok or Instagram. That also seems really effective. They have great longitudinal data. So it does seem like users want control and are noticing how their control is being taken away from them. And maybe they're placated by the like, hey, go touch grass reel that comes up every once in a while, but I would love to know more. Someone at Meta tell me.
Thank you for your talk, it was really good. I really like the term you used called media diet, and so I'm curious what your media diet is, and if that feels too intimate, what a suggested media diet could possibly be.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm like a perfect example. I get this question a lot of like, okay, so like the science, what do you do? And like, do you have a flip phone? And I'm like, no, I'm just a normal person. I also like TikTok. I also like Instagram Reels and things. I think my suggestion is like to really try and pay attention to your attention and do what feels good. Like, and I say this because I've also been on the other side of like having scrolled too long and then looking up and it's dark outside and I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Like, I feel fried. My brain doesn't feel good. I don't really remember what I've been watching. And so paying attention to that and trying to find the balance in it seems to be what's most effective, and it's in line with a lot of the psych research that's coming out right now. For adults, for kids, there would be a really different sort of like recommendation. But again, thinking about, maybe open TikTok tonight. I don't know if I like for sure recommend it, but open TikTok tonight and see if you notice the ways that they're trying to hold your attention. It's not just colors and visuals, right? They're gonna maybe start with a like, I have 10 things that are gonna be super awesome to hear about, and then I'm gonna say 30 seconds more before I start saying the 10 things. Oh, but also this and that, right? They're gonna use these other hooks. Some of it's really emotional, right? They're using all of the tricks from like Psych 1 at Berkeley to hold your attention. And it can be kind of fascinating to like open up the app and see what the tricks are that you notice that are happening. And I think having that sort of perspective and ability to take half a step back can help as you try and curate your own media diet for your own preferences.
Hi, enjoyed the talk very much. Thank you so much. I'm curious, after you finished this study, what were your top questions that you walked away with, and what do you want to study next?
Yeah, that's a great question. Are you an audience plant? Like this is, thank you. I really would love to do some longitudinal work, right? Is this something that we really are seeing change in real time, or are these digital natives that we're seeing as they're the first emerging Brainrot learners ahead of a whole generation of Brainrot learners, right? And how is that going to play out? I would also love to do some work on, can we really flip it and say, okay, I found these 20 Brainrot learners in our sample, I'm going to take away your phones and like take you to your woods, and you guys are going to be offline and see what happens, because I think that's a huge question that we don't have an answer to. Similarly, what the audio perspective is on this. So I became friends with some like sound engineers kind of serendipitously at the end of this study, and I was curious, like, we can quantify, like I showed with the kids media, the level of visual salience, but in my kind of, as I was recommending, practice of noticing the tricks that are being used online, there's a lot of weird like sound effects and changes in music and trending audio and the use of the expectations of that audio, and what is that doing? no one knows anything. Like audio has been really ignored, and I think it's a huge piece of what's going on right now. So if anyone wants to do a PhD that's here tonight, that please do it on that. It would be so cool. So yeah, those would be my big questions of what I would want to look at.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for the amazing presentation. I have a two-part question. First, because you just touched on audio, during the experiment, we saw that students who have a higher Brainrot preference, their gaze is still on the content that's being shown to them, on the physics of it. And now when we compare it to audio, I wonder if that Brainrot upper half of the screen is doing what white noise does for some of the people, where it helps them focus, but still their attention is on the content being taught. Do you think that's like a parallel we can draw? And the second part of the question was, did you observe if there's certain type of content that is more Brainrot friendly, maybe physics, but if you're doing arithmetic or actual numericals, that's like not Brainrot friendly, and having that upper half of the screen is super disruptive in that sense?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Yeah, for your first point, I think the Brainrot gaze wasn't important. So the looking patterns, and when you can create like heat maps of where someone's looking on a screen while they're watching, the number of switches and also just the amount of time spent on Brainrot versus control doesn't differ at all, which I was kind of surprised by. I thought that folks with less experience with Brainrot might switch more or have different patterns of looking, right? If they're like, whoa, what is this? But we didn't see that at all. So I kind of expected that the Brainrot learners would just kind of zone out and really be having an audio experience. That doesn't seem to be the case. They still switch quite a bit, even though they've probably seen that specific Subway Surfers clip like a few times. To your second point, thinking about like what level of stimulation and what that stimulation looks like is something that psychologists have like for a really long time wanted to know, right? Are you someone that watches lectures at 2x speed? Are you someone that needs to sit in a cafe to focus versus a really quiet library? And why is that? What happens there? I think that this is just kind of a new medium and a new like next level of that sort of, okay, I need to like listen to music, right? Which maybe 50 years ago would have been like, whoa, I can't believe you can listen to music and study, right? And I think, you know, as we've advanced in what's available to hold our attention, it seems like Brainrot is like the new version of people being like, oh, I can listen to music with lyrics while I study. Like, I have such a great attention span. But probably that it's just pushing that limit and changing and evolving the ways that we're trying to fill that channel of like, I need enough stuff to hold me here so that I can learn. And what the stuff that's available to fill that channel isn't now just like a Spotify, you know, calming study music playlist. It's now Brainrot and these visual aspects. So it does seem like it's changing with the media and evolving with the media landscape. But again, if we could go back in time and like test this with someone in like the 70s, maybe we would find Brainrot learners. It's hard to know.
Last question.
I want to go back to what you mentioned about whether it's like a feedback loop that increases or changes your attention profile, or is it something that people are born with? If you can share where this conclusion is coming from, because like if it's not a feedback loop and it's something people are born with, then the conclusion here is we should make more Brainrot, right, to serve those people.
Yeah, no, I do sometimes present this work and I'm like, am I part of the big Brainrot? Like, Brainrot's effective for learning for some people. You know, maybe we should all just like accept it and like solidly go into Brainrot and let that be the future. You know, I do think that we come to the world with differences that might lead into needing more and having this feedback loop. That said, you know, having a PhD in psychology maybe gives me like, you know, this much ability to say this. I would be really, really surprised to like meet a toddler that is like born needing Brainrot, you know? And if that's true, that's probably a very small percentage of the population, which I don't think we would have captured so many of them in our Brainrot sample in this study. So it's possible, right? We could have like, you know, people being born as Brainrot learners and that's their experience in the world, in which case we do need better content for them. And I think even if that's not the case and it is this kind of learned adaptive feedback loop, there still should be better quality control on TikTok, for example, right? You know, maybe you are a Brainrot learner, that's how you want to live your life, that's cool. but you should at least have access to like really high quality information as well. Even if you just want it with Subway Surfers, that shouldn't mean that you're then subject to like no control over your information diet because of the algorithm and like an uncurated feed that might be full of misinformation as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Let's give it up one more time for Sarah.